Can I just tell you that this is actually the video that I set out to make, and then I thought I'd expand it into an entire series, and that's how Bad News Lovers was born. That's right, Darcy was always top of the list. Hi, my name is Amrita and this is my booktube. Welcome to the final episode of my Bad News Lovers episodes, in which we discuss men that we love as a culture, and sometimes we wonder, this guy? And today's episode is about Fitzwilliam Darcy, a man about whom perhaps most of you, or just many of you, have actually never wondered, why is it that you love him? Let me ruin your life. No, I'm kidding. I love Darcy, right? Everybody loves Darcy. Darcy is basically the guy that women reference, and like men who haven't read widely reference when they talk about the kind of guy that women like. Now, this entire series has been about characters that I have liked and I have found interesting, if not likable. I know that seems a bit of a stretch considering how hard I've gone on some of these people, but honestly, I don't require my male characters or my lead characters to be particularly likable all the time. I just need them to be interesting. There are a couple of people on this list that didn't meet that criteria, and I feel like those are the people that I really went hard into, but I'm not going to name any names. I feel like I've done enough damage, so you can draw your own conclusions about that. When it comes to Darcy, however, he is one of my favorites. I do like Pride and Prejudice. It's not my favorite Austen novel, but I do enjoy it, and I think a lot of the problems with Darcy come from the fact that a lot of people mistake Pride and Prejudice to be a romance novel, when in fact it is social commentary, and that is clear from the very first line of the book. But there are a number of reasons why a lot of people mistake this book to be a romance novel, and it comes from something as simple for some people as the fact that it was written by a woman. A woman wrote it and it has a happily ever after ending, so of course it's a romance novel. It's an incredibly reductive and simplistic way to look at things, and unfortunately even today in 2020 there are people who think that way, and honestly, shame on them. But even if you don't believe that, the existence of people who think that way, and a lot of these people are people who haven't read the book, to be fair, but it creates a layer of assumption, and then when you as a reader try and grapple with the book and with the characters and their actions in this book, you find yourself at some point having to battle those public assumptions, especially because it used to be so pervasive in society at a certain point, and it really broke through and became the sort of standard understanding of Pride and Prejudice for a very long time. I've spoken before about reclaiming Austen and about reading her as literature and about trying to understand the ideas that she was trying to grapple with in her novels. But with Pride and Prejudice, the greatest lag between perception and reality, as you will find it within the pages of this book, comes in the person of Mr. Darcy. And I just want to give a shout out to my friend Becca, who is one of the only people who knew exactly where I was heading with the series. Like the moment I put Mr. Rochester at number 2, she immediately jumped to the conclusion that I must have put Darcy at number 1, and that is because Becca is really smart and she's an Austen lover, and she understands things that I feel everybody should understand. So to reiterate, I love Darcy. Please don't pelt me with stones and garbage. But I also think his depiction in popular culture is problematic, which is one of the recurring themes of the series as a whole, because I am not just interested in why particular characters are terrible, but I'm also interested in how they are translated into the wider culture and by whom and for what purpose. And so for these reasons, I think there could have not been anybody other than Darcy at the top of this list, because he is pretty much the person that the majority of people will think of when you talk about a romantic male lead. And they would be wrong, as I will explain in this video. So first up, let's look at Darcy in the novel. His first mention is not about his looks, it's not about his character, it is about his money. Now this is deliberate, and it is a theme that will run throughout this novel. How much money does Darcy have, and how amazing is it? It is singularly the most famous £10,000 in all literature. And as we see throughout the novel, it is those £10,000 that work as a charm for Darcy at every turn. Even Elizabeth's mother, who loathes him, suddenly finds that she can sort of overlook his eccentricities and his rudeness as soon as he becomes a part of her family. Now, Elizabeth, of course, doesn't really care about those £10,000, or so she says, but her first impression of Darcy is forever colored by the fact that he basically negs her at their first meeting. He calls her tolerable, and he says it, he doesn't even have the grace to whisper it. He just says it right out loud, where anyone might be listening. And someone was listening, and it was Elizabeth. And he knows that Elizabeth heard him say that. And Elizabeth, being a woman of character and self-esteem, is obviously disinclined to let that go. So when does Elizabeth actually feel any regret for her actions, for telling him off in such brutal terms? Is it when she gets his letter that explains his behavior towards Wickham? Not really. She has a fair amount of sympathy for his character, which is mostly sympathy for his sister, who doesn't deserve to have a rat like that in her life, playing with her and manipulating her emotions. And as a sister herself, presumably she felt really badly for the girl. But think of the scene where she sees Pemberley for the first time. The first thing that comes into her mind is that she could have been the mistress of all this beauty. That's right, folks. The true path to a woman's heart lies in a giant mansion. At repeated intervals throughout this novel, whether it is when he is visiting his aunt Catherine, or whether when he is with the Bennets in their little village, or if he is in London, at repeated points, the novel tells you that Darcy's money is really important, not just to him, but also to the people around him. But let's look at what it does to him specifically. He tries to sort of massage the truth a little bit and talks about how he was really too young to succeed to his father's shoes and to inherit all that money, and how it went to his head. But honestly, if you look at how that money might be translated into modern day terms, and I'm going to link down below to a paper by Catherine Toran. And at the time that she wrote this paper, it was in 2015, and she wrote it for the Jane Austen Society of North America. And it's really interesting, but at the time she was still working on her PhD, so I think she might be Dr. Catherine Toran by now. At least I hope so. And I believe in giving women their hard-won titles. So I'm going to call her Dr. Toran, even if I don't know if she's actually, finished her PhD. But she wrote this article that is really exhaustive, and it translates what £10,000 a year means in 21st century terms. And this particular graphic that you see up on the screen right now is actually, I think, based on her work, but sort of went through a couple of other publications first. But It's a really interesting article, and it really brings home the fact that all the people that you see in this novel are incredibly privileged. Like, we talk about the Bennets being middle class and stuff. They're not middle class, they're rich. Oh no, the poor Bennets making do with $200,000 a year. What are we, Republicans? But this again explains why Darcy is seen as such a romantic hero, because for people in the Regency period, which is when this book came out, it would be seen as a billionaire who is marrying somebody who is merely upper middle class, which is a hugely romantic thing in the 19th century. Class in Britain is a whole other topic, and I will be here till the end of time if I start talking about it. So suffice it to say that class divisions in England were pretty extreme, especially back in the 19th century, and the idea of a man of the kind of pedigree and the kind of wealth that Darcy possesses falling in love with a woman like Elizabeth, who, as charming as she might be, really does come from nothing, or is basically dirt beneath his feet when you compare their stations in life. So that is incredibly romantic to the audience of that time, and that has sort of spilled over into the 20th and 21st centuries. The idea of a rich man who ought to have married for, breeding or for money or for consolidating his wealth, but instead chose to follow his heart. Oh, what a prince. And honestly, this is why I feel a lot of Indians really get into Austen. I know that this is something that I felt when I was reading Austen for the first time, which is that I really understand how these class divisions work, because things haven't really changed in India. It's like 200 years on, but the idea of somebody like Darcy and Elizabeth getting together in Indian society is still pretty romantic by Indian society standards. So I guess I'm just really surprised that we don't see more adaptations of Austen in India. But the ones that have come out, I've really enjoyed. But the most insidious part about Darcy as a romantic hero, and the reason why I began thinking about him and in terms of him being a bad news lover in the first place, is because the novel suggests that he might have been reformed by his interactions with Elizabeth. And that is a line of thought that popular culture has really latched onto. And maybe I've mentioned this before, but I really, truly loathe this idea of people being reformed by love. I'm not saying that it's impossible or that it can never happen or that it isn't even enjoyable, because a lot of people do enjoy it, and there have been books written in which I have enjoyed it, including Pride and Prejudice. But it is a problematic trope as far as I'm concerned, and I really dislike it in modern romances, to be honest, because it just sets up unrealistic expectations for men and for women. Darcy's faults are not simple ones. It's not that he doesn't know how to do his laundry, or he's never washed dishes in his life. That's not what his biggest flaws are. His flaw is that he's entitled, and he is a snob, and he's a control freak. And each of those things is incredibly interconnected and is tied into his birth and his upbringing. It is, in fact, completely integral to who he is as a person. He feels that he has the right to control Bingley's life, and he feels like he has the right to decide the worth of the people around him. When he is talking to Bingley's sisters, and Elizabeth gets to see him in informal circumstances when Jane is suffering from a fever and is sequestered at the Bingley household. She gets to see a version of Darcy that is honestly repulsive. He has all these ideas about what women should be like and what ladies should be like, and he 100% imposes those ideas upon his younger sister, who is his ward. And the reason he's attracted to Elizabeth at that point is because she pushes back and tells him he's being ridiculous. And it's not that he agrees with her that he's being ridiculous, it's just that it's a novelty for him to have somebody challenge him. Think about that for a second. This is a man who is so rich and so entitled and lives in such a bubble of privilege that it is a novelty to have somebody tell him, not even angrily or forcefully, but as a sort of flirty, humorous remark that, hey, your ideas are ridiculous. That is a whole other level. And that's not going away just because Elizabeth falls in love with him, or rather falls in love with Pemberley. Let's be real. And for a man who is so consumed by the idea of what it takes to be a lady and who has a literal list of things that a woman should accomplish in order to be called a lady, he is incredibly unthinking about what it takes to be a gentleman. And it isn't until Lizzie points it out to him that he is basically behaving in an ungentlemanlike manner that he suddenly thinks, oh wait, being a gentleman isn't automatic, but I'm rich. And nowhere in the novel is he even described as being particularly handsome. Bingley is. He sounds lovely. Weak, but lovely. But for Darcy, what Austen really describes is his character more than his looks. Because here's the thing about rich men. Nobody cares what they look like, no matter what your romance novels tell you. So my theory about Darcy and about why my generation and, why we currently love him so much, it goes back to popular media and its depictions of Darcy. People who have read the books and people who have seen various different adaptations are slightly different, but I think to the general public, Darcy is such a romantic hero because of Colin Firth. And people think it's because Colin Firth is so handsome, which he is, 100%. But Firth has this quality that is much more important than mere looks, which is that he exudes a certain sexy, broody, take me home and turn me into a better man vibe. And that miniseries knew exactly what it was doing by making him take off his shirt at all those different points. In actual fact, I actually believe that Matthew Macfadyen is probably a more accurate Darcy in that he portrays him a bit more kindly than I would like Darcy to be portrayed. Like he just has this socially awkward energy about him, but is also significantly less handsome than Colin Firth. Like, no hate for Matthew Macfadyen, I'm not calling him ugly. I'm just saying, if you were to put the two of them up against each other, there's one person who is significantly more handsome, and that man is Colin Firth. Even if you think the 2005 version is way better than the miniseries, you have to admit, Colin Firth, one of the great beauties of film. Facts are facts. But even in the 2005 adaptation, it is worth noting that one of the reasons why so many women, so many people really find that version to be super romantic is because it's written that way using words that Austen never wrote. That speech that he has at the end where he is talking about, how he loves her, that is not something that Austen wrote. The part where he says that he can't get her out of his mind, that is not something that Austen wrote. The hand scene where he hands her into the carriage and then he flexes his hand and a million women lost their minds? That's not something Austen wrote. She didn't write those any more than she wrote Colin Firth taking his shirt off. But the thing is, if you want to make Darcy more romantic, if that is your goal, and the goal of these movies, the goal of these miniseries, it's definitely to present Darcy as a romantic hero. Because that's what sells, that's what people want. Give the people what they want. We are miserable. and thirsty. But it requires a certain amount of doctoring of the source material. And that is why I personally feel that the Mark Darcy character in Bridget Jones's Diary is probably the better Darcy, or rather the best Darcy. Because that's a man who doesn't really change. He is fundamentally the same person in the different movies. I'm not talking about the books. We will not discuss the books. That's a whole other thing. I'm not bringing that in here. But in the movies, you know that scene where Renee Zellweger's Bridget is just, had another scene where she feels humiliated and bereft, and Mark Darcy comes down and he says, "I like you just the way you are." And that is when everybody was just like, oh my God. But even in subsequent films, no matter how difficult they find being together, they manage to find their way back to each other because Darcy is a fundamentally decent human being who really struggles to become better, not just for Bridget, but because he sees that unless he changes, he can't have the image of a family and a relationship that he really has deep within his heart. So if he wants to make his desires come true, he needs to change in certain ways, and that's basically the give and take of the Bridget and Mark Darcy relationship. But basically, Darcy, the way that he is written, that is 100% a bad news lover. Rude, entitled, a snob, a nigger. And the best thing he has going for him is that he has a really lovely house, which is a pretty strong point in his favor, I must say. To conclude the series, I wanted to actually read out something that was sent to me by my friend Lauren, whom I have mentioned before on this channel. She is somebody I love a lot and is very kind and supportive, and has been watching the series, and I knew she was going to watch the Snape one and get back to me, and she did, and it was hilarious. But she also wrote something else about the general arc of the series. And the thing with Lauren is that she is one of the smartest people that I know, and has like a real eye for themes and for picking threads apart. And she says things that I have felt for a long time but don't always have the words for it, and she always finds them. So I asked her if I could just read out part of an email that she sent to me. So she says to me, "As for your broader question of why these shitty men, these romantic leads, that's a question I've wondered about too, including my own favorite assholes such as Mr. Rochester. My best guess is they express something rather unfortunate about romantic love. One never wants the love of their beloved quite so much as when one is not receiving it. When one is feeling misunderstood or ill-treated. I believe this is universal, even though this feeling occurs with far greater regularity in antagonistic relationships. I believe it still occurs in most well-adjusted relationships from time to time. It's an expression of the vulnerability of love and the flip side of love's invulnerability. Also, it can't be an accident that each and every one of these heroes really, really loves the heroine. I wonder if their undying, unshakable love is a sort of narrative safety net for exploring the pain and trauma of these themes." And I think that really speaks to the heart of the matter. The romantic leads that we love. We are talking about men who are fantasy figures. We're talking about men who, in real world terms, are probably the worst bet that you can make. But in a strange way, they make you feel and they pull you in directions that perhaps you wish and you hope that real life will never take you in. The characters that I have discussed in this list are men whom you perhaps wish you will never meet in real life, but are also the kind of men that you fantasize about because they have qualities that make you really feel. And in a weird way, that mimics the intensity of falling in love with somebody. That weird pain, that secret thrill, and just plain old desire. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.